Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thanks for joining. We're happy to announce Data Center, Atlassian's latest enterprise offering designed for high availability and performance at scale. We'll be recording this session, and we'll submit a link to the recording over the next few days. Our next webinar will focus on Confluence questions and extracting knowledge and finding answers with internal Q&A. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and submit those via the questions utility in the GoToWebinar control panel. I'll go ahead and queue those up, and Chris will answer them towards the end of the session. So on the phone today from Precipio Consulting, we have Christopher Pepe. Chris is a partner here at Precipio Consulting and recently attended Atlassian's data center training in Berlin. Chris and his team represent one of 5 U.S. companies picked to help deliver this offering. And I'm Shayla Sander. I head up business development for Precipio Consulting, and I'll be serving as a moderator for this webinar. We've been Atlassian experts for over 6 years now and are one of 4 platinum enterprise experts in the country. Over 95% of our projects are Atlassian related, and we have over 100 clients in the United States, ranging in size from small 20-person companies all the way to Fortune 20 enterprises spanning many different industries. We help our clients with process-centric technology solutions that facilitate traditional business process management, IT service management based on ITIL, and software development life cycles. In the SDLC space, we're helping our clients transition from waterfall to agile. Whatever widgets you produce, we help improve the quality and throughput at the lowest cost. We support our clients in all facets of the Atlassian product suite and build methodologies and solutions across the entire line of products. This includes solutions architecting and implementations, licensing, installs, upgrades and maintenance, hosting and managed services, and training. So now let's go ahead and turn things over to Chris to lead us through the webinar.
All right. So today we're going to talk about data center. You may have heard about this in the past. People have been alluding to it for a long time. It's something that we have wanted as a community for a really long time, and Atlassian has now offered us this actually really excellent solution. So I went over to Atlas Camp in Germany this year, and they unveiled it to us, trained us on it, and kind of showed us all about it. So really what we're going to focus on today is what data center is, and the 3 main features that we want to focus on are high availability, performance, and scalability. But before we get into that, I'm going to be giving you more or less a high-level overview today. I'm going to try not to get too deep down into the technical details because Atlassian is also doing a data center webinar on July 23rd, and they're going to offer up a lot more information. So I don't want to steal too much of their thunder today, but whatever questions you have, I'm happy to answer those as best I can. And in addition, we wanted to announce that there are 2 new types of support that you can get from Atlassian. First, there's one called Premier, which has faster SLAs. In general, they're about half the time of Atlassian's current SLAs. Your first contact comes from a senior support engineer, as opposed to a non-senior support engineer when you put in your tickets today. There's phone support, and there's a bunch of other things that come along with Premier. So if you go look on the internet, if you ask us where to find it, we can tell you more about it. They also have a new group internally called Technical Account Managers, or TAMs. And these are really designed for enterprise-level customers to have a direct technology liaison within Atlassian. So they'll actually work directly with you to build solutions, to help you adopt the technologies. They have a deep knowledge of all the different experts that are available and what all their areas of expertise are. So we're especially process-centric. So if there was advanced process knowledge that somebody needed, then the TAM would be likely to engage us and bring us in to help with that piece of it. So they're a really good way to get the Atlassian products up, running, optimized within your organization. So let's start off by talking about high availability. So the first of the three features that we're going to talk about is high availability. And really what we mean here is that now we have active-active clustering. So historically, we have only ever had the ability to run a single Jira instance at any time. Confluence did have a clustering solution, but there were some problems with it in terms of availability. So now with Jira, we have the ability to cluster. We can add, I don't actually know if there's an upper limit. I'm sure there's a practical upper limit to how many nodes you can add to the cluster. The largest installation in the world that I'm aware of right now is 4 nodes. So not a very big cluster, and they're not able to topple it. And that's a huge installation. They have lots of issues. They create tons of issues. They have tons of concurrent users. All the things that classically were challenges for a single node of Jira, where before, when we would run out of space, we would just have to build a bigger server. Now we have the ability to add additional servers. Now, because we're switching to a cluster, this is, of course, is going to require a lot more infrastructure. That's not really a lot more. It's going to require more infrastructure, and it's all known things. So if you have any other clustered applications running already, then your IT teams are probably already familiar with the additional layers of technology that are needed. And we'll talk about those in a minute. Again, historically, what we would do is just build a bigger server when we needed more processing power. Now, because we have a multi-node cluster, all of which can service requests, we have the ability to distribute that load across all the different nodes. So the first piece of extra technology that you're going to need to add is a load balancer in front of the cluster. Atlassian decided they didn't want to tackle the node balance layer and the database layer because those are already solved problems. There's already really good solutions out there for load balancing and for clustered databases. So they're really just tackling the application layer with a data center. So you'll need some sort of a load balancing strategy where round robin is a good one. So node 1 will process the first request, node 2 will process the second request, node n will process the nth request, and that'll just go back to 1 when it rolls over. This gives us the ability to have a number of different servers all processing a number of different requests. So we actually see that it scales very linearly. As an add-on developer, just a little aside, if you have your own custom add-ons internally, or if you're an add-on developer, you do need to think about the state of your add-on itself, and depending on what it does, you may need to change things to make it data center ready. There's already another good video out on the web from Atlassian on how to make your plugin data center ready, and I can talk to you at length about it as well. But I'm going to save that for later, just in case nobody actually cares about it on this call. Another really nice thing is that we now have redundancy. So if anyone has run a Confluence cluster, just go ahead and chat to me, just so I know that any of you have done it. But for those of you who have never run a Confluence cluster, you have the ability to add as many nodes to the cluster as you want, and that allowed you to scale very effectively. But if there was a problem with one of the nodes, it would shut down and it would send out a panic signal, and the whole cluster would panic and shut down. And that was to protect the database. And it was a useful thing at the time, but it took some of the value of having a cluster away. Now with Data Center, you have the ability to lose nodes that are in the network, and everything will just continue to work around it. So ideally, your load balancer will notice that as well and stop sending requests to that node, and then all the other nodes that are still up will just handle all of the remaining requests. Some of the additional infrastructure, you really should already have it on your single node Jira instance, but I know from working with a lot of clients that not everybody is monitoring everything to the level that they should. Especially with Data Center, you do want to have a lot of monitoring on all these different nodes so that if there's a problem with one of them, you get alerted to that, and you can go and repair that and get it back into the cluster and re-enable that additional processing power. So let's talk a little bit about scalability as well. So there was a very long period of kind of alpha, beta, and initial testing that was done. It's called the Pioneer Program by the time it got out to where actual customers were actually running what became Data Center. And then Atlassian did a lot of performance testing and analysis within their labs as well. And that's where that quote comes from. And this next slide actually illustrates it as well. So when we talk about user capacity, really the only thing that we care about is concurrent users, because you can have 1 billion users in Jira, but if only one is using it at a time, then it's no different than having 10 users with one user using it at a time. And with Data Center, what we see is that for every node that you add, we get a very linear additional bump in concurrent processes that we can run. So 2 nodes, not surprisingly, can handle twice as many concurrent operations as a single node can, and so on out to 4 nodes. Now, another place that we can get some of our scaling here is how many concurrent operations can your server handle? Well, that's going to depend on the individual node itself. So if we make these nodes very big servers and we have a number of them, then we can handle tons of concurrent users. So there's going to be a whole new set of ways of thinking about how we actually scale implementations, or not scale them so much as scope how big they should be in the first place. You know, we've been running Jira for a really long time, so we have a really good idea of how big a single instance should be in order to handle the load that you expect or that you have within your organization. And we'll see that as Data Center continues to mature, we'll start to get better and better ideas, and hopefully Atlassian will even publish sizing guides that we can use to get there. But for right now, we already know generally for a single node how Jira is going to perform. So we just have to multiply that by the number of nodes to get you to the point that you need to be. All of this put together, and actually the next piece is on scaling as well, and that fits into this a little bit, but really all of this starts to get towards resilience. And we're getting a lot of that because of redundancy. We always had the ability to cluster our database if we want. I know a lot of you actually already have clustered databases that sit behind Jira. And then with your load balancer layer, you could use a single load balancer, then that becomes a single point of failure. There are strategies to get around that as well, and a lot of you have hardware load balancers and other devices that handle that as well. But there was never a way in the application layer to have actual failover, actual redundancy. The best that we really could do, and reasonably, was a cold standby, so that if the active Jira failed, we would make sure that it was shut down entirely, and then we would bring up the cold standby. And we would have it set up in such a way that it was pointing at the same database and had access to the same home directory. So it was just like migrating Jira to a different server. But now we actually have an active cluster. We can drop nodes out of it, and the application layer is still going to be running. Playing some other sysadmin best practices, we can detect damaged nodes. We can stop routing traffic to them. We can alert admins that that particular node needs to be fixed. We can come in, fix that outside of the cluster itself, get it working correctly, and then integrate it back into the cluster, all without users actually experiencing any sort of downtime or necessarily even knowing that the application dropped off. Again, because the performance has been so good, again, the biggest installation in the world is only 4 nodes, and in most cases, 2 nodes are going to be more than enough to handle everybody's load. In that case, if you lose one, you still have a single node. So you might think about doing something like having a 3-node installation because you only need 2 nodes, and that way when you lose one, your performance won't be degraded either. But in a lot of cases, you don't even really need to worry about that. All of this is really driving towards the single most expensive thing that you have with your Atlassian tools is downtime, and especially when it's a unplanned downtime or an interruption. I know especially for our larger customers, whenever there's an incident where Jira goes down or one of the other applications goes down, that means a lot of people can't really get any work done. You can always keep doing things, I suppose, but it puts a really big wrinkle in the workflow itself. So having that downtime is really expensive. It puts a lot of people on the bench. At the very best, they're going to keep working and then have to try to remember to go update everything when we get Jira back up. So everything that we can do to ensure that the applications are responsive and up, that's going to make a really big difference in our in the eventual bottom line. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is instant scalability. So there's some really cool features in Data Center to allow you to scale your cluster. The main thing is that you can just add new nodes to the cluster. They all communicate to each other over multicast. So when you add a new one to the cluster, it just says, hey guys, I'm here, and then everybody starts talking to it, and now it starts sharing the load as well. You're going to have to add that node into your load balancer as well, but otherwise the cluster is going to manage itself. In that example I showed you before where one of the nodes caught on fire, once we go in and we fix that and we reintegrate it back into the cluster, its index is going to be out of sync. It's going to have missed a bunch of the stuff that happened while it was being repaired. Rather than having to manually rebuild that or go through some long process like we've had to do with a lot of other clustered applications that we've run in the past, Jira Data Center is going to automatically just reintegrate that node and bring it back up to speed on everything that's happened. So there's actually there's some shared indexing and there's some local indexing that they have, and all the other nodes are going to communicate to that server and tell it everything it needs to know to get its index back up to where it's in the same state as all the other nodes. And I'm not sure how many of you are on the call are actual sysadmins, but you'll know that without Jira's index, it doesn't do a whole lot. A lot of the way that the UI renders, a lot of the functionality in the application comes directly out of the index. So keeping that in sync and up to date is absolutely critical. But you don't really have to worry about that because Data Center takes care of it for you. And getting back a little bit to that cost, as far as Atlassian's licenses go, this is a little bit of a step up from their other costs, but it's a nice flat fee. It's $24K per year per 1,000 users. So it's a very easy, predictable cost for the number of users that you have. We have the ability to have zero downtime for everything other than upgrades at this point. So we can expand the cluster and add additional nodes to it. Nodes can drop out of it because they failed. We can go in and fix those. All of that with zero downtime. And then we know what our actual hardware cost is going to be as well. Because adding more capacity to the system is simply just adding another node into the system. So really where your big savings are going to be is in uptime, is in that you're going to have the application available for a much, much longer time. So the big question is, are you data center compatible? And again, some of the things that are going to impact that are plugins, both commercial add-ons on the marketplace as well as add-ons that you've written yourself. Now for add-ons on the marketplace, we as add-on developers now have the ability to set a flag that says that we are data center ready or data center compatible. And because data center is so new, a lot of add-on vendors haven't actually added that flag yet, so they may still actually be data center compatible add-ons. They just aren't advertising it as such yet. So if there's an add-on that you use, you'll want to go talk to either to us or go talk directly to the add-on vendor and find out if they're doing anything that's going to impact data center or if you need to wait to move to it. On top of that, there's a known and relatively straightforward migration path that you would use to go from your single Jira instance to a data center cluster. There are additional processes around upgrades and migrations and all of those other things that we do as well. So in many ways, it's exactly the same as everything we've always done in the past. There's just a couple of additional considerations because we have multiple nodes in a cluster which all need to be kept in sync now. So we can certainly help you through any of those challenges both today and as data center evolves. So if you have any questions about data center, either at the high level or low level technical details, feel free to ask me. If not, I will think of a few other things to tell you about it. There's no questions that have come in, at least that I have seen, about data center. So that's probably good. In a lot of ways, there's really nothing that's all that interesting or unusual or unexpected about data center. It's pretty much exactly what you would expect a clustered application to be. It fits all the industry standards. It acts exactly the same way that every other, at least a lot of other clustered applications work. You have to worry about sessions and things like that because different nodes can process different requests. You know, you can edit a Jira issue, and that gets processed by one node, and when you save it, that gets processed by a different node. So there's a lot of, especially for add-on developers and for Jira, there's a lot of considerations around that. But for the average user, they're not really going to notice anything different with the data center. All right, so how do upgrades work? So I'll tell you that the way that they work today, or at least the way that they worked when we got our training, they had mentioned a number of things along the way that made it sound like a lot of how data center works will be changing to make it easier on admins in the future. So the way that it would work today is, because a Jira instance and its database, the build number for Jira and the database have to be in sync, you can only upgrade one node at a time. So in that sense, downtime is actually going to take a little bit longer because you have to upgrade each node individually. So what we would first do is take all of the nodes down except for one. Then we would upgrade that node. Then we would start up the second node and upgrade that one, and then re-add it into the cluster, and so on with all the other nodes until we had everything back up and running. It was a little bit unclear to me if once you get that first node up and running, if you then can make it available to your users again and do the upgrade on the side and reintegrate that new node back into the cluster. Certainly in the beginning, because data center is so new, it'd be better if we just took a maintenance window for the whole upgrade, got everything upgraded, running, went through, did all of our user acceptance testing, and then let users back in. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the relatively near future there was a much shorter downtime window for actually doing the upgrade, because we'll be able to do some of those upgrade tasks offline and then reintegrate that node into the cluster. Does each node require its own database, or do they all share one? So I kind of purposely skipped over that because I know Atlassian is going to talk about it in their webinar, but just since you asked, each of the applications will use a single shared database. So again, in your optimal installation, you'll have a database cluster in the back end. Jira connects to it over JDBC, so it doesn't really care if it's a cluster or not a cluster. But you'd want your database to be clustered so that you have redundancy there. And then each of the nodes will connect to the same database. Similarly, there's a shared home directory that all of them have access to, and a number of things like attachments live there that will be shared across all the nodes. Then each node also has its own internal home directory where it keeps its index and logs and other things like that. So Atlassian will go into more detail as to what lives in each of those places, and if they don't, please feel free to ask me and I'll tell you all about it, but I think that they're going to go into that. But again, there's a shared file storage space and a shared database that all the nodes use, and then they have their own storage space in a local home directory as well. Great. It looks like that's all the questions that we have. Remind you that our next webinar is going to be about Confluence questions, and this is going to Confluence questions is a question and answer platform that allows you to crowdsource information from within your organization. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to sit with us this morning. We're really excited about data center. I know I went through this a little bit quickly, but I didn't want to take up too much of your time because you're probably going to go watch the Atlassian one as well. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I appreciate you attending.